Hey there, soccer freaks. This is ATL on Fire, the podcast where we talk all things Atlanta United Football Club. So sit back, buckle up, enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of ATL on Fire. We are on fire literally here at ATL, Atlanta United Football Dave. We are Groundhog Day.
It's been a couple of days.
Yeah,
I mean, what are you referring to, Mikey Dobbs?
Yeah, I don't know.
Nothing going on.
Coach is officially sacked as of yesterday afternoon, correct? Or was it in the morning?
I think it was in the afternoon. I might have heard.
So Gabriel Heinze is no longer the Atlanta United coach, is obviously the big headline. Evidently, according to Darren Eales, it had to do with a combination of performance. Obviously, our record is not good. We are 2-7-4, only 2 wins on the season. But the big part of their decision was kind of the day-to-day management of the team, things that were really off-field related or practice related. Potentially.
You're getting right into it. Should we talk about the wine first?
You're absolutely right. We should. So let's take a moment to take a deep breath and talk about the wine. That's a good call. Everybody should be having a glass of wine.
Mikey Dobbs is fired up, people. I mean, fired up. So in honor of the momentous occasion, I brought a very big wine, a Starmont from Napa Valley, a Cabernet, a big Californian one.
Ooh.
Very nice.
Oh, yeah. Loving it. Might invite you over more often.
And in this case, we're going to talk about it all, which means really we're just going to talk entirely about Heinze.
Probably. Yeah. So the reading through, some of the things that were said by Darren Eales in terms of, things that he was not doing correctly as a person to build the culture that, Darren Eales, in terms of what he's always said, wants to have Atlanta United be the model global type of club that, we have aspirations to be. But certainly the last 2 years of combined decisions made by himself and the people that he's installing into the building, like Gabriel Heinze, the biggest thing that was floating to the surface for me, beyond some of the MLS infractions that have been reported by the MLSPA, was the thing that really irked me the most is it sounds like he wasn't generally a nice guy in terms of treating staff and employees and creating a culture of at least having a smile when you're not serious on the soccer field, but when you're maybe in other environments where the culture of the club has to be a positive one with body language, even if he doesn't speak English well. If you're walking through and give a little, hi or a smile, like those things really matter in any organization. And fine, go back and yell at Kubo Torres to vent when you go back, into practice. I'm fine with that. But those are the things that really were red flags to me that were bubbling up without a lot of detail. Obviously, Darren and the team didn't want to give too many examples.
Yeah, so let's take a moment and see if we can at least run through the things that have been alleged or at least rumored. And I should say really they're rumored because the club really, again, has not said really anything in detail. There's some speculation that could be due to law considerations with regard to Heinze's contract. But let's go through some of the things. So you mentioned one, right, that Heinze is not thought to be a pleasant guy to the staff, to the people around. Okay, what else?
So, the other big thing that people certainly on the social media platforms are talking about during the preseason training regiment, at least for a certain period of that training, it sounds like he was trying to limit water intake of the players. I don't know if that was like something as he grew up, like one of his coaches maybe employed in terms of the thought process of, trying to make it through a game with lesser hydration or something like that. Or was it overblown in terms of there was a period of time where, there's water over on the side and he wants their attention. Go have your water break when you need it, but right now, come over and listen to me. We need to do this. And one of the medical staff or something like that blew it out of proportion. I don't know. only the players really know. And it is scary if he was truly trying to limit water to a dangerous degree, but I don't know what the real situation was there.
Yeah, so I'll start with your first one, which is the being pleasant to people. Obviously we don't know. We're not interacting. Despite what you might think on the ATL on Fire podcast, we have a lot of insight, but we're not actually in the locker room and we're not on the training ground, so we don't really know. Right. But, going back to what I originally was talking about, with what Sir Alex Ferguson said about when Heinze was on Manchester United, that, he was the kind of guy who would kick your grandmother. I can see it. Mm-hmm. As far as the water, break, the sources in some of those articles are saying that trainers had to get involved because, basically the players wanted to get a water break and he said no. I happen to think that, I'm with you that I can't imagine that that's such a big deal. Like, maybe, not giving the players any kind of break during training, but even that, the players are hydrating obviously before the training session, they're hydrating after the training session. Even if you're such hardcore that you're going to run them through an entire hour and a half or whatever with no breaks, no water, no whatever, it's not my idea of training, but I don't even think that would be the biggest of problems.
Yeah, it's certainly not. It's the one that has the biggest splash online. But as somebody who's played, both you and I played college soccer, we've gone through, long periods of just training, right? And then you come out and have your water. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, they are smarter about it in terms of, when the weather is X degrees and you have a professional environment like Atlanta United, they have people watching who, are trying to take care of the players, and that's great. But again, I don't think that is ultimately what's led to like injuries and stuff like that. Injuries are about stretching and more of the training regimen. Like if you are truly being overrun, your muscles do need time to recover. Like those are the things that actually cause injuries on top of actually getting bumped on the field, which is 90% of it, as far as I'm concerned. If it's a major injury like an ACL or something like that, those aren't going to be because of hydration.
No, not hydration. I do think, one of the things you saw in all major professional sports during COVID, with limited preseason and all the limitations of COVID, there were a lot of injuries. And so there is this thing about, overtraining and or training with not being prepared. I think at the professional level, it does result in injuries, but, I agree with you, probably not the water break.
Yeah, and so one of the other topics that came up was him not allowing players to take their mandatory days off. I forget the rules in terms of every 14 days and whatever. There's some mandatory time off.
So you're supposed to have basically 8 days off over 8 or 10 weeks, something like that, and you're not supposed to train more than 10 days in a row, something like that is what I heard. But there's some flexibility in that depending on different things. But yeah, go ahead.
No, and so, it sounds like at certain times he stretched that rule and got in, maybe 2 or 3 or I don't know how many more trainings on top of what the MLS rules dictate.
Mm-hmm. And supposedly there were a lot of 2 training sessions per day.
Right, 2 days.
Which is not really addressed, I think, so much in the rules. It's more how much training you can do in, how many days in a row and things like that. So I think you can train as many hours as you want on those days.
And and I said this so much on the last podcast, or, or I at least thought it, in terms of, Gabriel Heinze has played at some of the top clubs in the world. He should have a realistic expectation of what you can run people through on a day-to-day. But I wonder how his regiment compares to that of some of the best leagues in the world, and say, whether it be someone like Bielsa, who we know is also extreme in that respect. But, how does it map to like a Man City or one of these other major clubs? And so was he just trying to raise the level of a team's preparation? And that is that's creating some really nasty backlash with the water thing on top of it.
Well, supposedly, a number of players got hurt the day before a game, and that's pretty unusual because usually the day before a game is pretty light. I will say that my daughter and I had the privilege to go recently. We went up to see the Carolina Courage. My old coach, Paul Riley, who's the head coach there, who I got my coaching start under. He's still the head coach there, a very, very well-respected coach in women's soccer. And we were actually there for the training session. He allowed us to participate in the training session the day before the game. And I would say that it was pretty light. They warmed up. They had a series of, a little bit of tactical ball work. They did some, very short kind of scrimmage thing with where he was working on a few things. They went over some free kicks, and that was it. It was short. It was sweet. And in fact, what was interesting is after the training session ended, the players were, fooling around and kicking. They were crossing, they were, shooting, whatever. Yeah. And he went back on the field and said, "Get off. It is hot." And he was telling me, he's like, "Look, if you'll let them, they'll just play all day, and it's not good for them. They got to play tomorrow. It's high heat. Yeah. They got to be off." Right. So he's very cognizant of it. So obviously that's not the be all end all. There's a lot of different ways to coach a team, but that is a professional team the day before, and gives you a sense of the training session. The training session in its entirety might have been, 45, 50 minutes.
Right. Yeah, and we've talked about Paul Riley as a potential Atlanta United coach, particularly in an environment now where we've gone down the path of a European coach and Argentinian coach to try to get back to the Tata Argentine bridge. It clearly seems like they may go with a safer choice this time.
Yeah, you might see an American or somebody with MLS experience.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if they're not, going for swinging for the fences.
Yeah. We'll get to that. Maybe some speculation on who a good coach would be. And I'm going to lean on you because you know the options better than me there. But what else do I have down here in terms of?
So, the timing of all of this, right? So obviously people are talking about the Josef Martinez, the benching or of Josef Martinez, him being told to train by himself as being the straw that, broke the camel's back. But it seemed to have come out amongst, Darren Eales and the Atlanta United front office that this was actually coming. And, for a while now. And it wasn't necessarily the record. They weren't really that concerned. They were going to give him time for the record. But the thing that really started this was that the players filed an official grievance with the league. And that was coming off of preseason training. So this has been going on in the background before we started the league schedule.
And so how does that work? Is there a representative on the team, the captain, that helps file that with the Players Association?
Yeah, in the past, there's been a representative from each team. I know LGP used to be our representative. I'm not really sure who our current representative is. Who would, but, any player, I believe, can go to, there's a collective bargaining agreement that has all of those rules. The MLS is the players are represented by an official, lawyer or whatever. Yeah. So, a grievance can be filed.
And how quickly does the coach get to learn that the grievance was filed against him? Do we know?
That's a good question. I have no idea. Presumably, we have, again, a lot of this is so rumor, whatever. But in reading between the lines, between some of the people, I tried to read articles and listen a little bit to people like Doug Robertson who are, more plugged in, who are there at the training ground, etc. And my reading between the lines is that Heinze was told, I don't know whether he was told about the official grievance, but he certainly was told that there were some concerns about, training too many days in a row and this and that. And I should say the other part of the problem that was apparently part of this is that he never would tell them exactly what time. He told them they had to be available all the time. It didn't matter. They had to have their cell phones on, so if he wanted them on the training ground, he wanted it on the training ground. I don't know how much that's true. A lot of times when things unravel, people tend to, air extra dirty laundry. But in any case, it seems like he was told and suggested to him that he toned down maybe some of it, and he seemed to intimate that he might do that, and then just did nothing. It was like, I'm going to keep going.
I know,
which is very much what we think Heinze would go for. Right? So,
one of the things that is also was a bit of a shocker to me, because I don't mind, again, if he's a tough trainer, and at least, we knew that was the case with him coming in, that he had a tough training regimen. But I agree, there needs to be time for recovery the day before the actual game. And there's things that I would certainly do if I was making sure the team was relaxed, and not overworked, with time to recover before the actual whistle blows on game day. I think that's really important. On any team that I played on, you have to have teammates that you enjoy being around, and there's a little bit of horsing around. So even with that old Tata team, that was a part of their routine. There has to be some level of venting for the team to feel like they're actually connected to get the best out of them. And so one of the things I was shocked to learn, though, and it was in the Fox Sports article, I don't know if you read that one.
Yeah.
A guy, Doug
McIntyre or something?
That sounds right, yeah. And it was that Tata, for many of the players, did not talk to them directly and had an intermediary.
Heinze or Tata?
Sorry, Heinze.
You're getting ahead of yourself.
I am, yeah. So I keep sorry for that, listeners. Heinze evidently had a intermediary deliver and talk to players at sometimes. And again, I don't know. Again, we're not in the locker room, and we're not anywhere near the facilities. But this is what we're hearing in the trades. And if that's true, or if
we know that he fired his translator, or fired the official Atlanta United translator, and brought in his own dude who was terrible. So it wouldn't surprise me if he was communicating in Morse code or whatever.
And so between him maybe not being a nice guy culturally, or just a good person to other average people in the building, and him not being a coach that talks to his players directly, and it felt like he did have the players following him. So I don't know how true that could be, but it's worrisome if it was true that he's not actually having real conversations one-on-one with his players. Is that in top clubs common, that the coach, is having those one-on-ones with players? I mean, it feels like that's required, no?
I mean, I think that there are coaches who overdo it and are just trying to, talk all the time to their players. But, I've read Alex Ferguson's autobiography, and my impression, for example, even at the highest level, is that, in the key moments, he's the one who has the conversations about all kinds of things. Yeah. And so, yes, I think that is important.
And so clearly he was having conversations with Josef Martinez, whether he agreed with Josef or not.
Yeah, we still don't know how the Josef came to the forefront of this whole thing.
Which is, I'm curious, like, again, if Josef was the representative who filed the grievance, and there was like a Heinze discussion with him, like, why did this happen, and whatever, and Josef
and you would think,
stood his ground.
You might say, well, why didn't the players come to him? We don't know that they didn't, right? Because this is where we're all left in blind in the dark, right? Because you would think that the players were upset about it. The first thing they should do is not file a grievance, but actually go to him and say, like, we're concerned about this.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to speculate, but that's all it is. We still don't really know.
Heinze was a jerk. Josef overreacted. Heinze was a jerk again. Josef was a jerk. Who knows? Right? The interesting thing, though, the thing that was fascinating to me is that I've seen this trickle out now that, going back to your Freudian slip there, that Tata apparently had 24 days in a row of training. And a lot of this stuff was going on with Tata, who was very, wanted a very intense practice session or whatever. And there's some people who are calling, a little bit foul, like it's all hypocritical.
Well, that's how the world goes. Look, if Heinze had a winning record now, if we hadn't lost the best game we played, by the way, which was a 3-0 loss to Philadelphia Union in the CCL.
Oh, we dominated the beginning of that
Dominated that first half. Best soccer we played all season was a 3-0 loss.
Best soccer we'd played in a long time.
Yeah. So, and a few other moments where those ties could have been wins.
Well, so that gets me to an interesting question, right? So let's say theoretically they were really overtraining. Actually, in hindsight, I would say that the team looked like they were sluggish in the more recent games. I attributed that not to, I had no idea this was going on, but I attributed that to, not having people on the field, not having Sosa, not having Martinez, not having Barco, the players who make it seem like it's going faster.
Right.
But did you sense that there was overall the team was slowing down?
No, I mean, also because there's particularly the game that we went to on Saturday, there were so many new players out there that hadn't gotten a start, from Amir Sadiq to, we saw Wolf, we saw a bunch of players that typically aren't on the field. I mean, I think we said this, that really Lennon and Moreno would be, if you're looking at paper, potentially the only starters that you would ideally want on the field. I think, people are arguing for Walks to be on that list, but I completely disagree with that. I think he's a good substitute at this point.
Yeah, so Mikey Dobbs and I were at the game. We were discussing this, and we were saying, how many of these players would we have as fans, or Darren Eales and Bocanegra would have said, look, these are probably who our starters are going to be. Brooks Lennon, probably, even though you might say Hernandez, although he's available, so, whatever. But
it certainly seems Lennon's earned his spot. I mean...
and Moreno, of course, was definitely going to be, as a designated player, a starter. And you would say Alan Franco would be the guy who they thought would probably be in the starting lineup, who was yesterday. But other than that, you got to say that everybody was not. So you would say Sosa, would say Bello, Guzan, Barco, Martinez, Hangman. All would you expect to be in the starting lineup.
Well, and I guess now, to be fair, Amir Sadiq might be expected to be in the lineup in replacement of Heineman, no?
Yeah. You're talking about the new guy. Is that how you pronounce his name?
I think that's right. I might be getting that wrong.
I don't know.
It's Amar, I think, and then Sadiq, I think.
I don't really know.
He came from Toronto recently.
Yeah, he made his debut in the previous game. And so what did you think of him?
Certainly didn't make any big mistakes, was a little non-impactful, but also I saw him, for somebody who's coming into a brand new side, his first start.
Yep.
I'm going to give halfway thumbs up, upside.
Didn't look like a defensive midfielder to me, which he was playing. So, but maybe he's out of position. The other thing I noticed right away is all right foot.
Yeah, he's definitely one-footed, and he certainly wasn't moving the ball as fast as I would like. There's one where he clearly let the defender read a long crossing pass he was trying to make that was probing out to the right wing.
Oh, right. Well, that was the one we were arguing. You were like, he waited too long, and I said, yeah, he should. And he also played it with his right foot, with a straight ball instead of a left foot, hooking up the field. And it was he was trying to play it all the way out left to maybe Mulroney, and it was intercepted and led to a counterattack. And I think both of those things were true.
And so back to the point is, we never see any of our starters that we would ideally want. And I talked about this in the last podcast. Who's the dream team that if we could have starting every week, at least to give them 2 or 3 games consistently, who would that be?
So you got Guzan in goal. Presumably Bello's your starter on the left. The back two, you would have to say, would have to be Robinson and Franco was the planned back two, Walks being a backup. Right back, you didn't know at the beginning of the year. It was either going to be Lennon or it was going to be Hernandez. Nobody knew anything about him. Then, obviously, up front was Martinez for sure as soon as he got back to healthy. And then certainly Moreno and Barco as attacking midfielders somewhere in there. Sosa as the defensive midfielder. And then there's some variability. Maybe you say Jürgen Dahl, maybe you say Hyman as a box-to-box player. There's a number of things that was a little unclear, but those guys were probably the main.
Agreed. And, I can only believe if those guys were on the field for a couple consistent matches that we would have a winning record. And almost regardless of who the coach is. So the fact that there's so much talk about we haven't done a great job of picking talent, there's enough out there. I'm not saying we've done the best job, but
there's a narrative out there right now that, all right, De Boer failed, Glass failed, right? Heinze failed, right? So maybe the team's just not good enough. But I have a hard time with that. I mean, if you look at it, right, these guys are young, so that's for what it's worth. But there's some class clearly out there. I mean, for all the criticism of players like Barco is definitely at his best is class. Moreno, some people say, oh, he hasn't done anything, but he can really is beautiful on the ball.
Yesterday, he was the only class in the field that I saw. And yeah, you can say, didn't have an impact, but it's like any great team that you play on, like you have to have a supporting cast.
Sure.
And
especially in soccer where it's a 10-person on the field.
One superstar or even one really strong player is not going to move the needle that much if he's trying to do it himself. You need that triangle at least, and that's where like the three designated players never on the field together. Moreover, with all this international duty that's not going to be stopping anytime soon with World Cup qualification, I don't think we're going to see our starters together.
No. And I was going to play devil's advocate and say, look, okay, you were really on. We don't have all those guys together, sure. But the other thing is, at times, even in the Tata regime, we had all the players out at once. We have not had all the players out at once. Martinez was gone for a little while, but all the U.S. internationals were there while he was gone. As soon as the U.S. internationals went to the Gold Cup, Martinez was back, right? Barco was there for all of those matches initially, right? So it's not like we've had the whole team depleted. We've had good players in almost every match. I have rarely looked at our lineup and said, ugh, we don't have any talent on the field. So, we've had, Jürgen Damm who can play. He's been injured, of course. But, if you look at our back two and you say, well, Robinson was gone, right, for the Gold Cup duty, right? But when Robinson's gone, you're talking about Walks and Franco starting as your center too, right? Most MLS teams would love to have a pairing of that, right? So I actually have to say that I'm more inclined to the opposite. There is some critiques out there. I have heard from higher sources, and I won't say who it is because I don't want to get into a bidding match with some of the other people who cover Atlanta United, but I've even heard some critiques, and if anybody's listening, they'll know who we're talking about. There was critique of Sosa that he was supposed to be a passing player, and, he's only had one assist. I mean, that is clueless. You don't know soccer.
Yeah.
Sosa, although he's looked, to be honest, we've talked about it, he looked like he tired the last couple of games, and now maybe we have an explanation for that. But he was class for the beginning of the season, and he's a defensive midfielder. So who's asking him to go make assists? Yeah, nobody.
And, because he's so good, I mean, it didn't take a genius coach on the other team to figure out who you need to shut down.
Exactly.
So as he was progressing, we got a couple games in, the other teams clearly in the MLS were able to adjust, target one of our best guys in the back and really make sure that he was not going to be effective with getting the ball and making those probing passes that he'd been doing up until that point. So
I, this is my rant, but I don't buy it, right? I'm like, give me that team. Even give me the team, with the internationals rotating, whatever. And I think that I could have had a better record on this so far. We've had good teams on the field.
Yeah, I am worried, though, that we can, even with a miracle, make any sort of comeback for the playoffs because of the international duty and the World Cup qualifiers, knowing Miles and Bello. And I don't know. I guess they won't get pulled up for the real deal, will they?
If you watch the Gold Cup, not so much so far.
Right. Although Miles has gotten a goal and looked okay.
Yeah, but you got to say, none of them look like they're certainly not going to be starters. And none of them, of the Atlanta United players, look like so far that they're going to probably even make the roster to me.
Yeah. So how long does the Gold Cup go on here where we're going to be missing the three U.S. players?
I mean, the whole entirety of the Gold Cup ends up stretching maybe 3 weeks, something like that. Right. So it's been, a week or week and a half. It's got maybe as many as 2 weeks. It's not a long time left.
Okay, so we've got 2 more weeks of missing those guys, and then another.
I mean, we're already through the opening stage, which is a 3-game stage. So We qualified first in our group, so after that, I think it's do they even play quarterfinals? I think it's quarterfinal, semifinal, final.
Okay.
3 more matches.
So the Olympics are another 3 weeks with Barco gone then?
Yeah, the Olympics are probably a good 3 weeks. He's already been gone a week or so, yeah, he's got another 3 weeks. But honestly, I mean, not to say who needs Barco, but attacking midfield wise, right? Moreno is perfectly capable as an attacking midfielder. We have attacking
he's
midfielders.
The only. I mean, he's for as much as Moreno's deficiencies maybe defending. He does put other teams in the back heel, and we've seen that this season.
Yeah,
particularly as a sub, he's definitely coming on adding a spark. But I don't have a problem with him adding at least some level of I wouldn't call it creativity, but using his speed to put people on their back foot.
Presumably, we've seen the last of Cubo Torres.
You think so?
I don't know. I mean, I found out, which I didn't realize, that Cubo Torres played with Bocanegra, and so that maybe explains why he's on the team. But because and that, I don't mean that in a bad way for those Bocanegra fans. Because when Cubo Torres played with Bocanegra, he was a player. It was before the ACL injury. He looked like a real talent. So if you remember that in your mind, is look, this guy, whatever, you'd be like, oh, he has a chance to get back there. And you maybe don't really notice that he's not that player anymore.
So a sensitive subject for our podcast listeners. I am a little harsh on this.
Never.
I love Josef Martinez. I do. I think I really hope that we get to see him back at least even to 75% of the level he was. Like, to me, that would be a treat if he's able to achieve that. But you got to look at the facts, and he's not old. I give
28, I believe, right?
He's 28, so he's heading towards 29, recovering from an ACL surgery with a season that you could say is less than ideal in terms of getting back up to speed. And so time is his enemy, though, here when you look at, ACL injury, for him to put up great numbers, losing even a quarter of a step at this point.
But if you have to say, if Josef is going to play well, the problem with coming back from an injury like this is that, you fight so hard to get back, and then, you finally get up to speed where you're playing a little better, and then you get tired, right? Because you've had all the rehab, you've had all this fighting to get back. But, Martinez, maybe a blessing in disguise, he got COVID, so he didn't play in the Copa America, right? Basically, he just sat the whole time. So because of that, he had gotten himself up to speed, and then he kind of had a few-week break where he wasn't at least playing. I don't know whether he was even training. I think not. I think he was quarantined, so he was sitting. So that might just be the thing he needs to play well.
Right. Now he's had a little time to watch some video and get mentally prepared.
Yeah, you might see if there's going to be a resurgence of Josef Martinez. I encourage you to watch the game Wednesday night. We're now sitting on the podcast Monday night. Yep. So that's Wednesday night. We're right back at it. And then Saturday again. So,
yeah, I agree. And, I think I would definitely love to see the next couple games with Josef, particularly whether he was a little bit of the linchpin on making the Heinze out thing happen. I'd love to see him prove his worth in terms of coming back and getting some goals.
Yeah, he looked like he was starting to turn the corner a little bit. Yeah. Maybe not 100%, but certainly was playing better.
So, in terms of availability in the next game, good man.
I got to fill you back up.
The spreadsheet that I have, I have, I guess, so a lot of people are available, right? That weren't before, including Josef. Pull it up here. So,
are they officially listing Sosa as available? I don't understand. I didn't hear anything, and then he didn't play.
Well, exactly. I don't know, and I tweeted this spreadsheet to Doug at the AJC to see somebody in the media who might have any sort of injury report that they get to verify this because I don't know if Ronald Hernandez is available.
Right.
I don't know if Sosa is really available.
Presumably Ronald Hernandez is available because he's played in the Copa America, so he can obviously play a game. There's been no indication that he got hurt.
Yeah. Josetto was on the bench on Saturday, so he's available, right? Unless something happens between now and Wednesday.
Right.
Mulroney's red card was overturned, available.
I don't know. The interesting thing you wonder Sosa's an interesting part of this story, right? Because Sosa's Argentinian, has really the connection to Heinze, right? And so you would think if anybody was going to be on Heinze's side, it would have been Sosa, right? And yet the players went with a grievance. So is a player like Sosa or maybe a player like Alan Franco, are they on Heinze's side or are they with all the players? And one of the things you kind of think is that there was no report of a Sosa injury. He wasn't even on the bench. Maybe Sosa was on Martinez and the player side.
Yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing is that Martinez was clearly on one side. And if you might think, with De Boer, there was all this talk about the cultural difference between the American players and the European players versus the South American players. Obviously, Martinez now in leading in being part of the rebellion against Heinze, he's a South American player. So you can't say it was, it wasn't like Brooks Lennon leading the thing against, Heinze.
One other thing we haven't talked about, you have to assume, or I'd like to assume, that Josef saying he's not going to come back to the club in 2022 was due to Heinze being the coach, or is he still have that stance now in terms of where his head's at?
Maybe Josef actually has realized, the front office, the organization is not so good, and he wants to be in a better organization.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just don't know. You got to figure. I mean, the smart money would be on that he was just upset at the next, coach hiring, and if they can get it right, that it would be fine.
And it's worrisome. Even if we were to turn over the front office, like who's motivated to come coach at Atlanta United right now? A environment where it feels like the front office has got your back, whether you're Frank de Boer or Heinze, and there's other shit that's going on in the background. I mean, I feel like that's fair to say of the coach in terms of what their lens was, and that's how it is with any coach that gets sacked. Everybody's going to say one thing when the microphone's on there in front of their lips in terms of, we've got Heinze's back, yada, yada. But clearly, like you said, this grievance was filed at preseason. Things have been in the works in terms of evaluating whether he can make some course corrections. And,
I mean, obviously, Bocanegra and Eales are responsible for hiring Heinze. So you have to say, were they naive? Did they not get it right? Were they literally just looking to get someone who was more Tata and not De Boer-like, and they overlooked all of the stuff? I don't know. The one thing you'll have in their defense is that, when you first heard of the firing, you're like, it's on them. They fired another coach with, 13 games in, or 17, depending on whether you count the early games. But, what kind of coach would want to come in and do that? But on the other hand, I think they have an out here because it turns out that it was the players who revolted. And so it wasn't like they were just like, we're losing and we're getting rid of the coach.
And also, with the MLS infractions, I wonder if they don't have to pay out Heinze's contract.
Yeah, so that's what we were hinting at early on in the podcast where so there's, again, the Eales and Bocanegra have been frustratingly silent with information. There's been some speculation that they have to be because Atlanta United is trying to say that Heinze breached the contract, and if he breached the contract, they don't have to pay it all out, and they can get rid of him. It's much easier. But that's clearly going to be a lawsuit. Heinze is clearly going to file a lawsuit saying that they owe him the money. And if they talk about it and say too much stuff, then it's all going to be fodder for that lawsuit.
So we have an interim coach who was the assistant, correct?
Correct.
Valentino.
Another assistant, Rob Valentino. Did you look him up? I did some.
I did not do enough homework there, but I know that he is very well respected in terms of what people have to say about him. He played soccer in some of the lower kind of U.S. leagues. I don't think he ever played in the MLS, but he does know U.S. soccer.
No, that's not true. So he played for Orlando.
Oh, okay.
In the early days, on the terrible Orlando sides. But he was I guess a 3-time USL Defender of the Year. You're right that he played in the lower sides. He's originally from Argentina. So that makes sense why Heinze might want to have kept him on. He was here before Heinze. He came. He was an assistant under the Atlanta United Twos. God bless him.
And while it sounds like he was nervous coming on with his interview on what he's going to do as an interim coach, the one thing he did say in terms of like the press bite headline was that he's going to return to making a connection with kind of the players and making sure that they're happy
and that is pretty clear. All these, our own DDY Lagos Kunga, tweeted that he was a big impact on his career and trying to keep him happy. So it's clear that he's gonna, he's a player manager, that's for sure. The thing that concerns me, already he was quoted as saying, of course we'd want to have more freedom to go forward and whatever, which is the exact stupid thing that Glass said when he became manager. And it was like, we're not scoring goals, so the solution is just that the players need more freedom to go forward. Dear podcaster listeners, it is not as simple as that. If it were as simple as that, then every coach who wanted to score goals would just say, players, you have more freedom to go forward, score goals, and they would. That is not it. Right. Now, that doesn't mean this is just a one-off line. I'm not judging him by any means yet, but I remember Glass saying the same thing, that in his case he felt like De Boer had the handcuffs on and he was going to release the handcuffs and that was enough and they were suddenly going to score goals, and it just sounded naive right from the get-go.
Yeah. No, I read that too, and it's like, it's more about the players being capable of doing, all the players want to go forward.
Well, there's tactics involved, right? The tactics is, the reason why. So first of all, you'll say that one thing you've learned is that it is not easy to coach a team. It's not easy to win. Tata made it look easy, but it's not easy. De Boer, Heinze clearly have some coaching chops, some playing chops for sure, and both of them ultimately, at least here at Atlanta United, were big failures. So it's not easy. That being said, tactics is about maximizing, players having the opportunity to be where they can succeed, right? And that's not just about saying to players, oh yeah, go forward more. Right? Yes, you want players to go forward, but they have to go forward in a place that's their strength. If you have, Barco, trying to run behind the defense and people are catching him from behind, maybe not, whereas he's taking on a guy in the middle, it's much better. You have to put them in a position to where they can maximize their talents, and you have to get all of that attacking and movement. Attacking, as we've talked about on the podcast, is all about space and movement. You want to have space, you want to have movement, you want to have players in there where they are positioned to succeed, and yet you still have to maintain balance so that when you lose the ball, you're not suddenly, bam, giving up great chances.
Yeah. So what if anything in terms of Heinze's tactics, other than marching Kubo Torres out there repeatedly, what is the big thing that we weren't getting right in terms of a system that can be pressing up front where ball comes out, recycling it? That's what everybody loves, when you're in that situation where your team is on the other team's half, and no matter what that team's doing, even when they kick it out, it just kind of comes back out, cycles back out. You do a good job of getting it wide, crossing it in. Maybe it gets headed out and then it swings back wide again. Like, everybody loves that type of soccer where you are pressing them up front, getting high quality service into the box, at least having a reasonable chance of putting some pressure on the defenders or the goalie. And if it pops out again and you retain possession, right? Like, that's a system that you kind of dream of kind of replicating when you get in those moments of a 10-minute period in the game where that's actually happening. So how do you make?
Well, the interesting thing is we talked about in the podcast that I was pretty pleased by the tactics early on. We were matched up out of the back. We were making it difficult for people. We had a lot of possession in their, part of the field. I mean, in the beginning, I kind of said that it was the last third, a couple of little things that was going to click. I argued early on that if Martinez had been Martinez of, pre-ACL, that, Heinze would have been off and running because they had enough, chances. They had enough of the ball in the box. I kept saying that I thought, well, maybe two things, that it would click and we would start scoring goals. And then also I felt very strongly that defensively we looked really solid. We were making life difficult, and we had the chance to be the kind of team that could get shutouts in the MLS, which is almost unheard of now. And then it stopped happening. And, we wondered whether or not, it was just player availability. But in retrospect, maybe what happened was it wasn't the tactics were wrong, just the players got worn out. It kind of looked that in retrospect. Now, hindsight is 20/20, right?
Yeah. I don't know that I ever saw the players looking worn out. I don't know.
Well, I will say that in the beginning of the season, we talked a lot about how every time the other team had the ball and they were trying to, play out, we had a guy right on someone's back, and we were winning tons of balls in midfield and in their end. That was not happening over the last 2 or 3 games. In Chicago, it didn't happen. It didn't happen in the last game against New England.
Right.
And it certainly didn't happen on the road in Nashville, right?
So who do you think the starting lineup is going to be against Cincinnati on Wednesday night?
Well, again, we don't know because we don't know about the injuries. Is Jürgen Damm available?
No idea.
Is Sosa available?
Don't know. Alan Franco, what did you think of his performance in the game on Saturday?
It's interesting because he was frustrated with himself. You could see a few moments that he didn't do better, but I thought his reading of the game was pretty good. There were a couple of times he was right there and then the ball went through his legs. It just looked like he was a step off, maybe a step tired. I don't know.
Okay, all right.
You hate to say this, right? You hear about this and then suddenly, if you're out there as a podcast listener saying, that's BS, Dave Katz, because, you just heard about all this stuff and now you didn't say that beforehand. And I have to agree with you. I'm calling BS on myself a little bit. But I must say that from a standpoint, I would have told you very clearly that early pressure that we had out of the back wasn't as strong as what we're doing. What the reason for that was, I don't know. I would have said not having Robinson might have been a good reason for it. Certainly not having Sosa would be a huge reason for it.
By the way, you and I talked about this at the game, at least in the first half. There was some nice moments with Machop Chol in terms of at least him having an idea of being attacking minded and getting into a dangerous position. I think one got called off for offsides or something that, I think he put it in the back of the net, right, and it got called back.
Yeah, maybe now it's time to talk about the game, right? So we're down 1-0. There was a shot from the new guy, Amar Sadiq. Who knows? We don't know yet how to pronounce his name. This is in our we don't know everything part of the podcast. But, he shoots it. It's really close whether Chol was offsides. I think he was. I think they got the call right, but it was, not much. And then there was, of course, a deflection off the defender. And some people said, well, it came off the defender, and so then he can't be offsides. So you can only be offside if it's played, from your team. If a defender plays it back, you can't be offside. But that's not true when it comes like a shot or a pass that deflects off a defender. You can still have been offside on the initial pass or shot. And in this case, I believe that Chol was offside on the initial shot.
I'd have to go back and look. Okay.
I looked carefully.
But there was another instance even after that where he was definitely throwing himself at the ball, which was nice to see somebody.
Oh, the diving header, yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't quite get it right. I mean, I say, in real time, you and I were screaming for the New England goal. It was such a weird play because the forward slipped. He fell. The ball basically fell in his lap. and it just died. And it looked to me like when it fell in his lap, it had to have hit off his arm. And the Atlanta United players, stopped. That's what caused the goal.
Yeah.
I don't actually think it was poor defending. They kind of stopped. On the replay,
play to the whistle, Dave.
I know. As it turns out, it hit his thigh at a weird angle and just died. And it never hit his arm. It looked like it bounced up and hit his arm. It never did. So the call was right.
I was using the boys' room, of course, when we got scored on, and from the TV, and I heard the crowd, and so I just
was catastrophic. The other one that nobody's talking about that I can't get any replay on or whatever. I watched it. I recorded the game, so I was able to go back and watch it. It looked clear to me that there was a play where the New England defender was coming back towards his own goal, and we were about to get a shot off, and he comes back, and he clearly poked it to the goalkeeper on purpose, who picked it up. It was clearly a pass back.
Completely a pass back.
He did that intentionally. He expected the goalkeeper just to boot it away.
Yeah.
And the goalkeeper just picked it up. That's not legal, folks.
You don't do that back to your own goal unless you expect a player to be there to stop it from going.
I can see the referee arguing that he was tackling, and in tackling, he just inadvertently knocked it back to the goalkeeper, but I don't buy it. I think he did it clearly on purpose. I give him more credit than that. So, New England, if you're out there, you dodged a bullet. That was, that was not good.
Let's go to Dave Katz's list of.
Oh, can we talk a little bit more about? So we bypassed a little bit. Rob Valentino, the assistant. So we talked about he did play in Orlando, whatever. But do you have any thoughts about? I mean, he doesn't have a coaching record. How long do you feel about, in light of what happened with Glass, how long can we have an interim? Can they afford to let him be an interim and see if he does well before we get a coach?
It doesn't sound like he's going to be. I have a feeling we're going to get a coach announcement in the next week or two. 2 weeks would be a long timeline.
That's awfully optimistic of you, Mikey.
Well, here's the thing. I feel like Eales, and I'm hoping, right, and this is maybe false hope from a front office who's continuing to let us down, but if this is a plan that they've they knew that they're going to have to make a tough choice. Applaud them. He wasn't the right cultural fix. Not go down the path that they went with DeBoer, and actually make a decision that is right for the club. If he's not the guy walking around the hallways being nice to people that I was talking about, then
he'll clearly be that guy.
You kind of know that he's
just a question of whether to get the tactics right.
I don't know. I guess I just didn't expect that from Heinze, that he would be a jerk. He
had the reputation of the players really loving him. Be passionate, but
yeah, because he'd go to war with them, right? But that doesn't. I always expect a great leader to be incredibly good with all the personnel that are around the building, almost to a point of obsession. Sure. That would be even more than the way you're training.
Well, it's about man management. I mean, and soccer has two parts: it's tactics and man management, and it's a huge aspect of the game. Guys there's some fantastic. Biesla is one of these people who is really known for tactics and has, at many times in his career, gotten in big trouble because of his man management. And that makes sense. Heinze as a protege, but and vice versa. There are coaches out there, who are the opposite, and still, you got to have both.
Yeah, no, but I feel like it's so important to be the person that people who are not involved with the coaching and the tactics are treated really well by somebody who's leading the team. That has such a cascading effect on the culture of an organization. I said that earlier, but I really believe that. And I'm fine, and like I said last time, of Heinze being really stubborn and set in his ways with how he wants to train and bring that to a club that he wants to raise the bar. And I think he was trying to do that. Clearly, he made some bad mistakes along the way in doing that. All that to say, I feel like Eales and Boca saw the writing on the wall maybe early this time and started to hopefully have a succession plan in place when this decision was announced. and they've all but said it.
Secession or succession?
Succession, yeah. Sorry.
We would like to succeed.
Succession.
Secede from the train of coaches we've had.
Sorry, I should know from watching the HBO series to get my
I'm giving you
pronunciation correct. Thank you. And
so you had a question for me. What
no. The point is I think they have their guy. I think they need to cross the T.
So you were going to ask me about who's the guy?
Who's the guy? And I don't think Valentino is going to be in the position of coaching too many games. So I feel like that's hopefully not a conversation we're having too long around. Did he get the tactics right to actually be offensive?
I feel like every action is in response to the previous action, kind of thing. And so I agree with you that it wouldn't be surprising to me to hear a non-South American, non-European, maybe, an MLS guy. But, they have very high ambitions. They've swung for the fences with every coach. And I don't think they're going to stop swinging for the fences. So I would think that it would be, a coach that has had some success. And there aren't any, the obvious name would have been a guy like Bruce Arena, who, had super success, has been around or whatever, but, he's tied up and old.
Yeah.
So there aren't really MLS coaches who have had a tremendous amount of success that you would point to and say...
Yeah, they're all in service, like Bob Bradley or someone like that. He's still at LAFC, right?
Yes, still at LAFC. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Martin O'Neill, getting really up there in years, but has had tremendous success in the Premier League and in Scotland. Might be a guy who Darren Eales knows.
Any English league coaches or European coaches that are,
I mean, the one, who obviously Chelsea snapped up. Tuchel was free. And Pochettino, they just swapped. Right? Pochettino left Tottenham and went to PSG, and Tuchel went from PSG to Chelsea.
You got to get somebody who's got a proven track record of winning.
I mean, if you want to go crazy, whatever, you would say Conte.
Yeah.
Right? Conte got run out of Roma. Crazy. Won the title.
Zinedine Zidane.
So Conte was at Roma, and then he went to Chelsea, and then was at Inter Milan and won the title just previously, and then said... they wanted him to stay, and he said, "Oh no, I'm done." So he walked away. But does what does an Italian coach have to do with coming here?
That's highly unlikely. A lot. There's.
You could go back to Dutch, right? Obviously Barcelona. Barcelona did get rid of Koeman.
Did they?
Right, so they ran him out, yeah.
Koeman's no longer with Barcelona.
Yeah, isn't that true?
I don't know. Maybe I missed that. I didn't know that they sacked him.
I feel like they did.
I don't know.
Mistaken that? I should know that, of course.
You keep up with the international stuff better than me, so I'll trust you.
Zidane left Real Madrid, right?
One of the names that's been thrown out is Frank Lampard.
Lampard has shown nothing.
Too
but
unproven.
Nothing. If anything, Tuchel just showed how tactically naive Frank Lampard is, because Frank Lampard, had that team plummeting down the table, and Tuchel came in and all he did was simplify the system, strengthen the defense, and suddenly they went on a 14-match winning streak and won the Champions League, right? So I don't think that's such a reflection of Tuchel being such a great coach. It means that Chelsea had a good team the whole time, and Lampard sucks.
Yeah. And I think that's how everybody's feeling in the Atlanta United 17s, that almost anything right now is a positive step. So long as you got somebody who's nice to people in the building.
I mean, these crazy moves, obviously, Miami went with Phil Neville, coming off of coaching the women's team, and was awful. And he's, not done anything there with a decent side. The coaches who got hired who did really well. I can't remember his name, but the guy who got hired at Orlando had a terrific MLS track record and is doing really well at Orlando. And obviously Caleb Porter, who had a real track record and went to Columbus, and suddenly Columbus, won the title. But both of them are under contract.
Are there any other South American coaches that would be worth considering?
Everybody go back to the names that people were talking about when Heinze was hired, but the one guy who I can't remember his name who was talked about a lot, but he just re-upped his contract in South America. So
yeah, I don't know. They've got to get it right. I am hoping, and then the next 2 podcasts will be talking about a new coach, because I think they do have the decision made. I guess if that be the case, how quickly can they execute?
You would think they would if they've had, if they've known since preseason that there was this grievance filed, and so they were thinking about it then. Maybe they give him a couple weeks to right the ship and see if he went, and he didn't do that. They had to have been looking, now for the last, 4 or 5 weeks at least.
And Darren Eales is clearly a people person. He should be the first person to identify what Heinze's behavior is in the environment in the building, not with the players if they're locked out of the locker room and all of that, but the way that he's creating that, again, positive vibe within the entire culture of the training facilities, on the bus, wherever they go. Like they should be able to see some of those behaviors reflective of the coach that you want. And I have a feeling that Eales maybe hopefully had a strong enough opinion on that early on where they started the planning of who the next coach was.
Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, you could see a wild card like someone out of the college coaching ranks.
Yeah.
I've always said on the podcast that find me a winner, right? I don't care what level, right? People say, oh, you can't make the jump from college coaching to MLS, maybe. But, if you have a guy who's got a phenomenal record, Caleb Porter made the jump from college coaching to MLS, and he's done terrifically well. So he won a national championship as a college coach out of nowhere. So, and then the other kind of coach, who you would say, Tata, who succeeded in a lot of his coaching jobs, but then got run out of these high-profile places, like Ancelotti would be another case like that where he got run out of a couple of clubs. He now just returned back to Real Madrid after they sacked him, 15 years ago. Oh,
because he left. He was at Everton, right?
Everton, yeah, he's done really well. And then they hired Nuno,
Sanchez,
who's your Wolves coach, who's looking like he can really coach.
Yeah, he definitely can coach.
And there's a few guys like that. The Roberto Martinez's of the world coaching Belgium, Sanchez. Guys who haven't coached the best teams, but have done really well at a number of smaller clubs.
One other thing I wanted to bring.
Even Emery. That's funny because Emery went from Sevilla where he had won, not Sevilla, Villarreal, no Sevilla. Oh God, I'm mixing them up now. But anyway, and where he'd won the UEFA Europa League, multiple times with Sevilla, and then went to Emery.
Went falling apart on me, Dave. Went to your alma mater and got his degree.
Went
in
to
genetics.
Arsenal. Good gracious, and got run out of there for being like super tactically naive, and then went back to Villarreal and won the Europa League again, right? And you're like, so people are like, he won, and then they were like, he's awful at Arsenal. And then, so they ran him out, and he went back, and now he won the Europa League again. You're like, how does he do that, right? Obviously, can coach.
Is Arsene too old to coach?
Arsene Wenger?
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if Arsene Wenger would love to coach in Atlanta United. He has been rumored to be itching for a year or two more because he's he's always been a always been an admirer of American sports and these, new wave and all this other stuff, and wanting to push the envelope. It wouldn't surprise me if he would be interested.
Yeah. One thing I want to just bring up on the podcast is, look, we've had a 2-year spiral. I don't know if we're at rock bottom yet. We're certainly close, I hope, on a rebound.
Don't you have to admit you have a problem before you reach the bottom?
That's probably true too.
So by that analogy, has Bocanegra and Eales admitted they have a problem?
No, they are in the shadows. Those guys work in the shadows. I really am disappointed with, it's great they had a presser yesterday and talked cryptically about making sure that they don't get sued by Heinze to win the battle. But leading up to this, I just feel like the front office has not done any favors with the fan base of providing a level of transparency on a number of fronts with, why Josef is in timeout. Like, I don't even understand why. Like, I'm still curious why that is and why it can't be explained.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Even with everything coming out, you would think they just fired the coach. The first thing they would say is, this is what happened to get Josef Martinez in timeout. And
right. We don't know what we don't know. We're not near the building. We're just two guys on a podcast talking about Atlanta United, which we love, but it doesn't add up the way that they're treating the fans at this point, which is a real problem. And what I wanted to say is I want to applaud our fan base as an Atlanta sports team, even with the misery that we're going through, whether we're rock bottom or not, we're still podcasting about it. The fans still care about this team, and they're not getting off the bus.
No, I mean,
ever.
It's funny because people were talking about, the crowds were down, whatever, but I didn't really think that much. Yeah,
no, I mean, I didn't think so that much. I mean, I think there was a little bit of a dip, but
and we're still in COVID, people.
Yeah, and in COVID, I feel like there was not enough of a signal that they've lost any sort of backing from people who now love soccer in Atlanta. And I was even at the pool, people went to the game on Saturday. I was at the pool on Sunday. First Atlanta United game, I was just overhearing somebody talking about it. They had a blast. They knew nothing about soccer, and they're getting introduced to soccer at Mercedes-Benz, and those are future fans.
Okay, now, dear podcast listener, as you may have heard, in the 6th or 7th minute, the crowd broke into a chant of Josef Martinez. And Mikey Dobbs, in our section of all people, was yelling,
Gabriel Heinze.
So now, in light of that, do you feel that was warranted? Are you still behind Heinze? Or
no.
Have you just thought it was BS now and you're off the bandwagon?
No, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because I can take ownership when I'm wrong. And 100%. I really is disappointed. Again, I'm disappointed in the two things, like the water breaks and all that. I think get overhyped. Weird, but unless there's a lot more facts on that, I don't want to go with the rumor mill on that. But if that's true, that sucks and it's weird. But in terms of him just not bringing the right positive body language to the building, and
you keep coming back to that. That really bothers you.
It drives me crazy. I know what. I won't go. I've been fortunate to work for good people that have those traits, and now that I'm 46, I realize how important that is. I've been lucky enough to.
You don't look a day over 45.
Thank you. No, I've been fortunate enough to work for people who understand that you can be hard on people and ride them with getting the execution part done, but at the end of the day, you have to treat everybody in the building with a ton of respect and a ton of positivity, or the whole thing's a nightmare. I mean, it's a matter of time before it implodes. And I don't care what the business is, that's going to be the case, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've been very vocal that you're in favor of a little bit of the coach having my way or the highway, and I agree with you that you have to be in charge. It has to be yours or whatever, but not at the detriment of, of player relations. And at the end of the day, the players need to be so behind you that they'll, run through a brick wall for you.
No, so that's the difference is like, right, I'm good with him pressing the players to a level of uncomfort that they haven't been to before, and that is growth. And that's good coaching and all of that. But yeah, it was disturbing. And again, I'm just going off the rumors here in terms of he just wasn't a nice guy in general. And that's, with Tata Martino, right, you saw a guy who clearly had a personality, right? Like
definitely has charisma.
He has charisma, right? And so whether you're the referee getting patted on the shoulder and then you get the red card.
First coach ever to be sent off for patting the referee.
There's a different personality that's a leadership trait that seems to be missing in Heinze's suite, which I have to say I thought was there and maybe wasn't, as well as his ability to know how to at least, if a player does need direct one-on-one communication, take a moment, like you said, don't overdo it, but sometimes less is more, and whether that's a sentence or two or whatever on encouragement or constructive feedback, like you have to be a leader that can do those things eye to eye with a player. And those are the two big things that have surfaced that I believe are the dagger of where he went wrong, and maybe it has as a crutch as a coach even. And so I thought those things were in place when I was chanting Gabriel Heinze. I thought actually those were things that he was really strong at that got people to follow him, streaking down the road. Yeah.
I had to agree with you. I agree with everything you said, but for once.
I think the water breaks, while they're the easy thing to point to, were the last of the real reasons that
if you're the marketing director for Gatorade, here's your opportunity.
Yeah. I think
we here at Atlanta United are now using Gatorade for our water breaks.
And if you have to credit the front office, if there was like a fact that they were going to bring up and use as like here's why we're getting rid of, like, oh boy, like especially in this era, like if people aren't getting their water, they were going to die, and they definitely were pulling hammies because of that.
Well, I have to say that, for all of our consternation at the lack of information on injuries, et cetera, whatever, they've been professional, Bocanegra and Eales, about, not, throwing Heinze under the bus. They could have. They have not. They haven't come out with all that information. You would argue that the downside is the fans are frustrated. The upside is that they're professional about it, and that means that another coach might want to work for them.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think, credit to them if this be the case that they knew that they had to make a tough decision like a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And they've been in the background planning for it and hopefully have learned their lesson, because I think overall I feel like the fan sentiment with Heinze was a good one back in December. Maybe naively, but I think we were happy to move on from Frank de Boer at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't a whole lot of negativity around the choice of Heinze. I mean, I think, if you go deep into the Twitter sphere, that there was plenty of people that maybe were providing the warning signs for what we're seeing now.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, I feel like the fan base was happy for a change. And, maybe Darren and Boca matured a little bit actually behind the scenes.
And credit to Martinez for not saying anything either. I mean, he's been super professional about it. I mean, he could have easily come out and said, I'm not being a jerk, right? The whole player, I was just supporting the whole players and blah, blah, blah. But he didn't air the dirty laundry and kept it, mum's the word.
But is there something he can give us now? Evidently, he is a part of the press. Pre-press on the pregame tomorrow, so we will hear from Josef being interviewed by reporters tomorrow.
If you're Josef, please tell Eales and Bocanegra, no more Glass. We do not need another Jonathan Glass in over his head as an interim manager for whatever.
Stephen Glass.
Stephen Glass, sorry.
I was like, who's Jonathan?
Oh, Jonathan Glass. I apologize, Jonathan, is a guy I work with. Misspoke. Yeah, Stephen Glass. Yeah, no, but please don't give us an interim coach Goodness gracious, who's over his head? So
yeah, please.
So here's our last thing. Is Valentino over his head?
Oh yeah, I think so. As a head coach, I think so.
So you're on the record as saying he's got to go, and we're about to have a new coach.
Yes. And if not, then I'm very disappointed with the front office. I think it is.
I'm going to take that bet. I just don't think they can pivot that fast.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So I'm only saying I give them credit if they've been planning for months and have their guy or gal who's going to take over as the head coach of Atlanta United. And, if this doesn't move quickly within, I'm going to say 2 to 3 weeks. If it goes beyond 3 weeks, major failure by the front office.
Okay. You heard it here first.
All right, everybody.